There is keen rivalry between the black and the white populations of South Africa. It is not competition. Competition is about two parties trying to outdo each other. That is a good thing. I wish there was such competition between black and white. Rivalry is about parties trying to gain advantage over each other by hook or by crook, which means not necessarily by fair competition. Competition is positive because it improves performance, but rivalry is negative because it is about entitlement. It is not about demonstrating superior performance, which is what competition is all about. In fact, the black versus white rivalry is about entitlement to the fruits or benefits of superior white performance. The only competition when parties are engaged in rivalry is mutual bad-mouthing. The bad-mouthing is dishonest. It is a psychological mechanism to admonish one's own envious eye. I am talking about the comrades who call the DA the party of oppressors because they say it is the party of white people. Yet the same comrades go to great lengths to ensure that their own kids are admitted in historically white schools. If you listen too much to Malema, you would think that South Africa will make great progress the day whites are driven into the sea. But Malema sends his kids to historically white schools. I have mentioned it before that condemning whites is a form of religious ritual. Often whites are condemned as a form of emotional blackmail. In other words, it is aggressive begging. The idea is to induce guilt in whites for ancient apartheid. The guilt is induced in whites in the hopes that they will give and give generously. Guilt-tripping white people is therefore a prayer for their favors. The biggest religion in South Africa is led by comrade parties, and it recognizes whites as God. Often when whites complain of racism, they are mistaking blasphemy for racism. There is such a thing as aggressive prayer. Blacks will never compete with whites as long as they regard whites as gods. Terminating the practice of worshipping whites necessarily requires the abolition of comrade parties. The fundamental premise of comrade parties is that whites are gods. That is why the comrade parties are still promising to liberate us from whites, though the ANC has been in power for 30 years. Whites are alleged to rule by divine power. What I've observed is that a lot of whites aren't flattered, but they are simply overwhelmed by the awesome power comrades imagine they possess. In South Africa, whites are a mere 7% of the population. People imagine that more than 90% of the population can be economically empowered by the minuscule 7%. Comrade party representatives go about telling the world that the economy of South Africa is in the hands of this tiny 7% of the population. In fact, all it means is that the economy of South Africa is much smaller than what it should be, what it would be if the 90% were creating wealth instead of expecting whites to create it for them. We should be complaining about the economy 90% of the population hasn't created, instead of the tiny economy which can be and is controlled by whites. BEE was invented for black minority countries.